motion to approve the minutes.
Motion approved, seconded. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On that note, we'll shift to our financial report.
Okay, and I can, Melanie, if you want me to give me a kind of a brief overview and see if they have any questions, I could do that. I'd like to introduce Melanie Lammers, our finance manager, and also our assistant treasurer, I think technically it's called, for HEDRA. And so Melanie has prepared a report here on our financial condition for HEDRA, and was gracious enough to join us tonight to answer any questions that we may have on it. But just looking through it in particular, she noted within the executive summary a couple of different items. With the Hudson project, that certainly affects some of our funding levels that we had. It draw down the fund balance that we had for the industrial park fund, or our 407 fund. And so that is down to a level that is below what we would typically would like to see from a reserve standpoint, down to about, I think, $30,000 altogether, $34,000. And we have another reserve fund, which we term HEDRA EDA, which we have 1.2 million. So the combined reserves that we have are about just under $1.3 million. But within that HEDRA HRA fund, which is the historical fund we use for HRA operations, that's the fund that we levy for, that's getting down to some pretty critical levels there. The fund that we've used historically for the industrial park, that's the EDA fund, is 1.2 million. And we've had some internal discussions as far as, you know, if you might be able to transfer some funds to another, or use some activities between funds, and so those are options that we're exploring tonight here. We've had some grants that have come in over the last year, as you're well aware, that have changed some of our cash balances, as well as some of the loans and some of the write-offs for loans that we had in 2017, which have dwindled our reserves a little bit further on that one. One thing that she does note there is the HEDRA EDA fund balance. That's the fund balance that's at that $34,000 level. Will need to be addressed sometime in 2018. So if you've had a chance to review the report, we can stand for any questions on that one, or Melanie, if you have anything further to add.
Back, 'cause this is
Okay, what's her page
the
number?
last, you go to the back, like the last, the fourth from the back,
Are we past the,
past the corridor.
oh, we're past the corridor.
Yeah. Literally 4 pages from the back.
Here we go. Okay. I wondered why I couldn't find it.
It's just a fire at, yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. If I read this right, John, I think I heard you right. So the HRA balance is at 34,000, 1.2 million for the EDA, confirming that, right?
Correct.
But right next to it says fund balance exceeding threshold. Do we have any policies that, so we don't ever get to this, where we say, you know what, we need to keep a balance of, so we never get to approve to go below that? Or is it not needed because it's there for a reason, is to help redevelop, I should say?
Sure. And with the fund balance, we do have a policy in place to not go below 30% of, is it 30%, Melanie, of the funds that we've spent in prior years?
Yes.
Okay, to not go below that number. And then we have a spend down provision in there if we exceed over 40% of our budget within that time period. So, Melanie, within the EDA fund itself at 1.2 million, have you reached that 40% threshold that we may want to look at spend down, or is it still?
Yes.
Okay.
With the two funds, I wanted to get this report out in front of you.
Yeah, and if you can go to the microphone there too, because we got,
I can do that.
thanks.
Good evening. So I wanted to get the report out in front of you. It's been a while since you've seen one, and we had a lot of activity going on in these funds, especially with the Hudson Development Project. So some of this is, the 404 fund is going to continue to fluctuate as we finish up the Hudson project. And you do have, there's several loans that we granted in 2017 that they haven't received the funds for yet. So when I said we'll need to address the fund balance in 2018, we'll just want to keep an eye on that, because if we have a flood of new business loans come in, we may need to address some cash shortages. But I think we have, between the two of the funds, we have a very healthy balance, and that may be something we can talk about this year as well, as John was saying. You know, do we want to somehow balance out the funds? We were gonna look into, do we need two funds? Do we want to combine them? Because for all reporting purposes, the funds are combined. It's just our internal record keeping that they're separate. So I don't know if that, if,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, please. Melanie, maybe you can answer it, or maybe John can answer it, is when we became an EDA, HEDRA, why is there still the HRA and the EDA are separate? Is that an internal choice we made, or is that something in statute that says we have to?
my view on it, and maybe John can answer as well, but I have never seen another city set up this way. So I believe it was a conscious choice by the city to set it up as a combined HEDRA fund with both entities. Typically, I've seen there's an HRA and an EDA. They both are a special levying power, but they're different, and we are utilizing the HRA special levy piece with the state.
Yeah, and to add more information onto that, Ron, yeah, I have no reason or preference as to why we still have two separate funds on that, and it may be much easier to have one if we're able to do that. If there may be some other reason that we're not aware of where it needs to be or should be that way, and that's something that we're exploring.
Sure. So, as I understand it, we have two different, actually, cash flow inflows, an HRA levy and an EDA levy.
No,
We only have the one,
we have the
the
one,
EDA,
the HRA.
the HRA.
Yeah,
And
it's
we are funding
confusing.
the EDA through the HRA, and it's been done that way for years from what I can see in the books.
Yeah, because we had, when we had the separate HRA, we had the HRA levy for that.
Right.
When we established HEDRA in 2009, we continued to use the HRA levy. We have the possibility, the option of instituting a separate EDA levy, but chose not to do that. And so the accounting measures that I think we've had historically, and it may be just something we've done historically and just haven't changed for whatever reason, is we always had that 404 account for HRA funds. And so we had a fund balance that was established from that. And then through the city's levy and budget, we had funding for industrial park operations historically, which grew into other economic development functions when the Industrial Park Board became the Economic Development Commission. So it is a lot of misnomers in here that are confusing, but I think the point that you bring up is a very valid point, and that is there really a need to have these two separate funds? Because I think it's confusing for all parties involved, and that's something we're exploring. I think it would be simpler from where we stand today, just to have one.
I think we should continue to talk about that because it does separate it. Not that we're gonna have this huge economic boom and we run out of funds in the one account, and next, we're asking HRA side of it, hey, can we borrow some? Maybe I would like to do a little more homework. I mean, we may ask our mayor, because he helped set this up. Why did we stick with the two? Was there a philosophy that said, we're gonna help the housing market and we're gonna help the economic market? And it was just easier just to bring it in through one account because of going out to levy funds. And I don't want to handcuff us that if we have a chance to go out and levy funds for economic side or HRA side, I don't even know if that's an option. Not that I want to go out and levy any more money, but it might be a good way of us being able to track where our dollars are going.
If we could have a copy of any decisions that were made at the time on merging these entities, and whether it was for accounting purposes or there are procedural or administrative reasons, financial reasons, governmental, whatever it is, so that we could maybe put it up for a vote next time we meet, so that it could be remedied if it's needed in the future.
Okay.
To just sort of consolidate and simplify it.
Well, and that's the question that I was going to ask. Is this something that we can do by vote, or is this something that has to go through the charter or through the city council? Because HEDRA was created by charter, as I recall, through the charter of the city. But I'm not sure, I can't remember, how specifically it was laid out in terms of that. But Commissioner Vaughn, I think, has a good suggestion that we look to our lame duck mayor and ask him before he leaves, what the intent was. I know he was a very, prominent mover and shaker to get everything to become HEDRA at that time. So I just have a feeling I don't think we can do it ourselves by vote. But this is weird that we don't, we've got this and we don't really know why. But it's not really weird. There it is. We just need to dust off a few pages of something and figure it out. So, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about the loans receivables? I've missed meetings, so maybe this has come up, but, and it's not necessarily the forum to go and step through every single one individually, but with several delinquent, or, it talks about the 126, 368 as uncollectible, deemed uncollectible at this point. Are we gonna wanna look at that in terms of trends? Is that seem to be trending against certain types of businesses or downtown businesses, or is it just the natural percentage of being in the business of loan and funds? That represents, at least anecdotally, a number of potential loans to continue the process. So it seems like a number worth looking at some point in time.
Sure. Would you be able to shed any more light on what constituted the 126?
The 120, it went up, the 81,000 went up because we just had one loan in particular. It was a more recent loan and the business has shut down. So the collectability is in question at this point. The 81,000 is comprised of, they're a couple years old, but there was a bankruptcy involved with the majority of that 81,000. And I think there's an outlier in there I'm not remembering off the top of my head as well.
I know a couple of them, there was about $60,000 worth for RJ's, I believe, downtown. We had two $30,000 loans that when that went through bankruptcy, that was one that went into default. Does that include the write-off that we did last year for Elm Salon?
I don't remember off the top of
And
my
there's
head.
that one too, yeah.
And I had in my notes, so that was what I was gonna recommend when we get into that workshop today, to think about going forward. What are we gonna do on loans? Who's making the judgment of is this loan good? We are. Is it a good loan to give out, but what if we don't ever get paid back? Then we're not being very good bankers, if you ask me, so.
But we're not. Well, not all of us.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. That'd be a great topic. Just, again, is that just, there's gonna be a default number. That exists anywhere you go. I don't think we can avoid that, but. Okay, yeah, we can talk about that later. Great. No action here tonight, right?
No action required. It's an informational item, so if there's no further questions, then we've heard the discussion tonight relating to checking in further to see some of the rationale and possibly some of the effects of combining the accounts. So we'll follow up with further information on that one for the group.
Okay.
Can I add something?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention, John and I are working on a request for proposal for a financial consultant that we're gonna be looking at. So my recommendation would be to wait until we get our consultant on board and let them work with us to make a decision with the information that we find. So maybe in the summer sometime, not necessarily next month.
Okay.
That's a role for citywide financial consultant?
Yeah, what we're doing is we've had two separate financial advisors, one for the city and then one for HEDRA. And the thought was, well, maybe we should have a financial advisor for both. So historically, with the HRA and later with HEDRA, we've utilized Ehlers and Associates. The city has utilized Springstead. So where we would be, I presume, inviting those two firms and maybe some others to provide a proposal for representation of both entities.
Which would simplify things a lot. It gets very cumbersome when HEDRA wants to do something and needs bonded dollars, so I have to have 2 consultants involved, 2 attorneys, and then it's cumbersome. So it will make the holistic picture a lot easier and more streamlined with a singular consultant.
Well, and I'm assuming we'll save some money by doing that. Instead of
Hopefully.
having 2 law firms talking to each other, we just have one.
Yeah.
So that's good. Okay.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you.
All right, so going back to agenda, bills.
Looking at the bills for March here, a couple of loan payments for loans that we've issued that are going out at this point. So the larger bill is the CenterPoint Electric bill for Hudson. Now, I looked into that one a little bit further to ensure that that bill did not include time after we've owned the building. It did not. It's backdated right now to carry through a month and a half from January to, I think, the end of February. So if my information is correct, that really should be the last big bill that we have for maintenance of the facility. We may have an additional bill coming up here for a small period of time of February, March, that we come in the next month, but that should conclude our large maintenance bills for the facility. Also included in there is our annual fee to open to business as well, so I could stand for any questions.
Having none, motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve as presented.
Second.
None. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we're moving on to business.
Yeah, the first thing we have under business is a consulting services contract for Block 1. We're asking tonight for authorization of signature. Block 1 is commonly known as that area located just north of Art Space. It's a property that HEDRA owns. We've owned it for quite some time now. When we sold property to Art Space last year, we learned through the development of that property that the environmental cleanup that was certified as being done in 1997, the regulations had changed. And so it necessitated Art Space to do further environmental cleanup to meet new thresholds on it. And so I'm anticipating that that same issue is likely to come up on the property directly to the north of it. And so what we're asking for tonight is, we've had Braun Intertech, who was the consultant that worked with Art Space, so they're familiar with the site, provide an estimate for services for what we deem a Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental review. Phase 1 would be your paper investigation and to see if there is contaminants on site. Based on the knowledge of what we have, we're pretty certain they are. Phase 2 of that would be some physical testing that would be involved within the site itself, some soil probes and other mechanisms to do that. The total cost of the contract would be just under $30,000. We're also submitting 2 grant applications to Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED, and Met Council under environmental investigation funds. And so those applications are due May 1st, and so hopefully we'll have grant funds to reimburse us for the cost of this. If we don't have those grant funds, we have funds allocated in the budget, the operating budget for HEDRA this year to cover the cost of that investigation.
Ron, please.
John, if we don't get the grants and we have the funds available, that's fine. Is this a reimbursable expense if the cidery project goes or someone other project goes down on the river? Is it an expense that we can charge the purchaser for the property?
Yeah, potentially we could. I know our history on those sites from an environmental cleanup standpoint, we haven't, but I guess there's nothing to preclude us from not doing that.
Okay.
John, in terms of working with Brown Intertech, which, from what I know about it, was a great company, just in terms of establishing fair, reasonable pricing and competition, is there any reason that wasn't put out to Terracon and AMEC and other environmental consultants?
Sure. At this point, the familiarity with the site, and they've already done a lot of the legwork just to the south of it, so the familiarity aspect of it was the determining factor in looking for a direct quote from them. If it was a situation where that familiarity wasn't there, then I'd be looking at doing it generally.
And do you think that just, that saves them a step and thus saves us some money,
Yes.
theoretically? Okay.
Just had a follow-up question to that too. Without having a solid purchaser, how imperative is it before we know what environmental impacts might be important
Sure.
to do that?
Good question. When we're looking at that site, historically, it's been a challenging site for us to develop. We had one development plan in 2005. The market went south during that period. Prior, the 10 years plus prior to that, or almost 20 years prior plus to that, we had various proposals that came in that didn't pan out. And so what I'd like to be able to do is to remove as many obstacles as we can to development of that site, and environmental is a huge one. I think we would be in a much better position to be able to have a site there that the environmental factors are known, and even better if the environmental factors are cleaned up than we would with a site that has environmental issues overhanging them. It's just another obstacle that we're going to have for development of that site there. And being a municipal entity, we're eligible for grant funding to help clean that up. So there's the investigative grants that we're applying for now, and then there's also cleanup grants that could come later on as well.
So this should encapsulate a whole lot of issues that could come up, cleanup excluded. But they'll
Yeah.
at least say, if it's gonna be for this purpose, it'll be
Right.
this expensive, or give kind of an estimate of what it will take.
Exactly. We'll know what we have to deal with from an environmental standpoint. We'll have the soil pro borings in there. We'll know where the areas of contamination are. We'll be able to provide estimates as far as what the cost would be to remediate those, and whether that would be something that we would do or whether that would be something another entity would do would be a question for later day.
So, action is to authorize signature on this?
Correct.
Mark makes a motion.
I'll second.
We have a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Yep.
Vermillion Corridor Plan.
Thank you. So as we are on the home stretch of the Vermillion Street Corridor study, we wanted to provide an overview of the draft that we had provided. So as you know, the purpose of the Vermillion Street study was to identify areas for economic growth and redevelopment along the Vermillion Street Corridor, as well as to create a working plan that included implementation steps, potential partnerships, and the role of the city in the development. More specifically, this plan looks to improve the market position of the corridor through targeted redevelopment sites, aesthetics, multimodal transportation, and a connection to Hastings. So the plan has segmented the corridor into 4 distinct districts. The downtown, which is considered 2nd Street to 8th Street, which has a development style of a traditional downtown, continuous 2 to 3 story buildings transitioning into 1 to 2 story buildings, as well as historic homes. Midtown, which is 8th Street to 16th Street, has larger scale buildings, strip malls, and standalone office buildings. This section also experiences high traffic volumes due to the intersection of Vermilion Street and Highway 55. The Vermilion River, which encompasses 16th Street to 25th Street, has the most diverse collection of land uses and conditions. And while it's mostly commercial, the study finds there is opportunity here for mixed-use development. And lastly, Southtown, which is 25th Street to the southern edge of Hastings. And this section is defined by larger parcels and commercial uses. So the study has found targeted sites or opportunity sites, which were selected through resident, business owner, and stakeholder feedback. And they represent opportunities for redevelopment that could have the potential to serve as a catalyst for future investment along the corridor. So these sites, as you see, were further refined based on analysis from our consultants of the size of the property, opportunity for parcel assembly, the underutilization or vacancy of the sites, location along the corridor, proximity to amenities and natural features, as well as the current use of that site. There were two key findings which are reported in the Issues and Opportunities memo and are reflected in the concept models that we'll go over. Were that the retail market along the corridor is fairly saturated, while there is opportunity and a need to expand the housing stock. And the model sites, which we'll go through in each district, are a subset of the opportunity sites shown here, and they were chosen to demonstrate potential new development that adheres to the plan's recommendations. So the first district, the downtown district, has many strong assets that should be preserved and improved. The plan works to extend and connect the district to our historic downtown, preserve the historic character and homes, maximize commercial frontage, and make the district more pedestrian-friendly with buildings that define the street, as well as streetscape and gateway enhancements. So looking at the model development for Site A, the redevelopment concept for this site consists of a mixed-use buildings with commercial on the ground floor, with office and residential above. The buildings have a shared parking lot in the rear, which is accessed from 5th Street and Eddy Street. The parking lot has landscaped islands and is screened from the right-of-way, and the buildings are set back from the street to accommodate pedestrians to walk comfortably in both directions. The space between the buildings is used as a pedestrian walk and a plaza space, which could also be used for outdoor dining or event space for the commercial uses on the ground floor. The next district, Midtown District, is centered around the intersection of Vermilion Street and Highway 55. The existing character of this area, as well as the high traffic volumes, creates an opportunity for a unique commercial center along the corridor. This plan works to capitalize on this advantage by emphasizing shopping and dining, making the area more walkable, integrating both walking and driving, while also allowing residential uses. So the model for this district is Site E, and this consists of 3 separate developments with similar characteristics. The ground floor is dedicated to retail, restaurant, and personal and professional services, as well as office uses on the upper floors. The standalone commercial building, which is located along Highway 55, could be a restaurant with a second floor outdoor dining, looking out onto Todd Field. And the space between that restaurant and the mixed-use building could act as a plaza, which can be used for additional outdoor dining or event space. The building organization, the street network, and the parking will encourage pedestrian and neighborhood resident interaction. As you will see, 13th Street is also extended to Vermilion Street to encourage walking and to improve vehicle access to the site. And parking is located in the rear, which has been softened with landscaping and buffered from the residential that abuts it from behind. The next district, Vermilion River District, has many assets, including the Vermilion River, Vermilion Falls Park, the Hastings 10-mile scenic route, and the Leduc Historic Estate. This plan works to better activate these assets by creating greater access, connection, and by also introducing residential uses in this area. So the model site is Site G, and this consists of 4-story multifamily buildings. The primary attractions for this residential use of the site are the visual and physical connection to the Vermilion River, Vermilion Falls Park, and the 10-mile scenic circuit. This site is also close to Conagra Park and the Leduc Historic Estate. The ground floor of the south building could house commercial uses such as dining, entertainment, and retail. And the ground floor of the building to the north could house amenities for the residents of the two buildings. Parking again is located in the rear and has been softened with landscaping and buffered from the adjacent residential neighborhood. The Southtown District currently has a mix of both commercial and residential uses, and this plan works to focus commercial development on Vermilion Street and Red Wing Boulevard, with residential development in the interior of the district. The plan extends the street network to improve connectivity and establishes a gateway at the intersection of Red Wing Boulevard and Vermilion Street. So for this district, the model site is Site L. In this model, there is new single-story commercial uses along Vermilion Street with residential uses behind. The single-family attached homes are located just north of the existing residential neighborhood, with multifamily right along 33rd Street. This new neighborhood would include green space and walking paths for the residents, and the street network has been expanded to improve access and connectivity. Transportation, as you know, also plays a part in the overall success of the corridor. Some specific points for transportation are property access, pedestrian zone and streetscape, and community connection. So property access, the study says to improve the safety and traffic flow of Vermilion Street, it's recommended that properties consolidate parking lots and share access points, especially from cross streets. Pedestrian zone and streetscape, improvements to the visual quality of the corridor could include facade upgrades, reconfiguration of parking lots, landscaping, screening service areas, and overall general upkeep of the properties along Vermilion Street. And community connection was an important part, as the success of Vermilion Street relies on incorporating what is already in Hastings. Our arts community, incorporating artwork into our public and private spaces, as well as preserving and marketing our natural resources, such as Vermilion Falls, Riverwalk, parks, and trails, through increased signage and wayfinding. So implementation. There are a few suggested steps for implementation. Regulatory actions, which include reviewing and revising our zoning to ensure alignment with the recommendations of the study. Utilization by city officials of this study when reviewing and evaluating proposals. The city should assume leadership role in the study's recommendations, while also realizing that the city can't do this alone, and that the success is based on strong partnerships with the development community, residents, and the business community. Success of the plan involves reviewing and updating the actions. So reviewing periodically and making improvements and updates to the plan accordingly. Ensuring priority projects are included in project and budgetary scheduling, and utilizing economic development funding sources at the federal, state, local, and county level. And also maintaining regular communication with the communities that we've reached out to already, and continuing to involve the community in updates. So as you'll see in the study, there is an action matrix that includes numerous policy and project recommendations. This action matrix summarizes the key actions that the city can take to achieve the vision for Vermilion Street. It also establishes the anticipated timeframe, partnerships, and general cost of each action. So as a city, we can utilize the action matrix to assign tasks to various departments, identify potential funding sources, and explore strategic partnerships that will help this become a reality. And as actions are completed and the study is updated, the action matrix will also be revised to prioritize the remaining actions and add new ones as needed. So I am open to discussion or any questions you have regarding the plan.
Joe, please.
You know, when we went through this last week with our consultant, Andrew, one thing that had occurred to me is at what point, or have we run any of this by MnDOT, or is it too soon to show this to them in terms of, you know, what we're looking at, and for them to start thinking about a redo of Vermillion Street?
So MnDOT was part of the stakeholder meeting, so they were part of the beginning process. But it is part of the plan to include them in seeing this final plan and just maintaining that communication throughout their planning process as well. But as you'll see in the action matrix too, they are a very strong partner of ours.
A few questions here. I mean, we've seen it a few times already, but I agree, MnDOT's gonna be a challenge, but also an opportunity. I think that's a good observation of this, and I think they've been, I go back to the last plan that we had, and John's probably haven't, many times I brought it up to him. What's the life expectancy of a plan? And again, it seems like we always do a final adoption, here's our plan, but then we gotta stick to the plan, or maybe there isn't a final adoption, as this is just the starting point, that this plan might move around. I can't emphasize enough, this is not a public funded project. This is us trying to get the private sector to be energized and try to say, make it an economic boom, and that's kind of the push of it. So yes, we're a leader in it, but I just don't want it, like the Riverfront Running Funds was that was funded by city tax dollars. So this is gonna be the opposite, in my opinion, where we're trying to energize some of these business owners or future business owners down there. My big question is, I see we identified some sites. Have we bounced it off those owners saying, and has any owner said, oh, get that, I don't want to be anywhere near that plan? Have we got any input back, or, I mean, because we are talking about implementing and potentially rezoning property that they may say, that's not was our business model of that water.
Right, that's a good question. So our next steps are to reach out to these key property owners and get their thoughts on these, get their ideas, maybe any obstacles that they see that would get in the way of doing something like this, or maybe they have ideas to make the plan even better for that site. But having those discussions with those key stakeholders, those key property owners, and other developers as well. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we make this happen? What are the obstacles, and what is the city's role in mitigating those obstacles? I think is the important next step.
And follow up with that, because I agree with potential developers. Is there a network or a roundtable where, and is it a fee to that, where we got to say, we have this plan, we know that you develop all around the Twin Cities. Would you take a look at it and give us some input? Is that part of this project, or is that do they just help us out with that? Or is there a fee to that?
I guess I can't speak to that I know of something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can reach out to certain developers on, a one-on-one basis and present it to them as well. But I can do some checking to see if that's an opportunity.
If I could add a little bit more to that too. I mean, through the plan development, we had involved as many people as we could that were on the corridor, either residents or business owners, both within there on a few different times in there. We also had some stakeholder interviews of key property owners, so we were able to incorporate some of their ideas and suggestions. But you raise a good point, Commissioner Vaughn, that we want to be able to make sure that we're not in this position of doing something that's antithetical to plans that they may have in the long term on that one. What we do realize is that with the plan that we have here, there may be areas, or there's likely going to be areas that are going to be more ripe for development, where the stars align, where the market, the owner, and other factors are ready to go. And we're in a unique position here in the standpoint that we're more of in a facilitation role than a development role. What we want to be able to do is to provide a plan for those that seek to develop property along the corridor, either the owners that are there now or people that are outside of ownership that may be looking for development opportunities. A question that we often get is You know, what do you want to see? What sort of things might you be looking at? This plan provides us a pretty clear picture of that, which is good. So when as Morgan was describing, our next steps on this plan are really going to be to talk specifically with some of the key property owners that are identified to see how this matches with their plans. Does it match in short term, long term, not at all? And then find those areas that we feel can move more quicker than others, and see if we can link those up to a developer and then determine what sort of role we may have to play in that.
I think identifying, we've identified a number of sites, even getting that number a little bit smaller of what can move more quickly to serve as a catalyst for the remaining sites.
Yes, and I was talking with our city administrator about it this afternoon, and we've got 4 quadrants. I don't think it's a good idea for us to say, let's concentrate on quadrant 1, or let's concentrate on quadrant 4. It's going to depend on who's coming in and what they may want to do. It's exciting. It's really exciting. I mean, and it's in much more depth than the last study that was done, that we kind of ended up ignoring. And I can happily say I wasn't on the council when that all happened, so I can finger point, I suppose. But it just shows a really solid vision all the way up and down the corridor. Okay, so where do you as a developer want to plug yourself in? We've got property owners too. When we had the open house a week or so ago, and we had some business owners there, and I said, you look at this and please understand, it's not like we want Emily's and Perkins and Downtown Tire and all of you guys to just disappear. We certainly want to make sure that with whatever development occurs, we don't leave you hung out to dry. And that's also an exciting part of the whole development prospect. And I'm going to bring that up, I guess, in a little more detail, so that when a quadrant starts to fill up, all right, what's going to happen with the businesses that are there? Can we get them into the commercial spaces that would be below the apartment complexes, and so forth? Are we going to move them to another side of town? I don't know. I have no idea, what's going to be best. I just don't want to lose Emily's. That's all. And as Mark said, do we adopt this and say this is what we're going to do, or 2 years from now we take a look at it again and say, well, let's tweak it a little bit? I hope we don't look at it 2 years from now and say, well, this is all wrong. We've got to do it all over again. I think we need to, you fish or cut bait. Let's do it. So yeah, I can see that there would be a little bit of finagling along the way. But as an economic development director, I would imagine you're salivating about all the exciting things that you may help pull in to what's going on up and down the corridor. And it's about time. I look at Stillwater. They've got 2 hotels they're putting up on their main drag right now. They're actually, they're building them, and restaurants, and it's just going. And you go out to Chaska, and you go out to Shakopee, and you see everything that's going on, and those places are 40 minutes, 45 minutes from downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, and here we are just, 20, 25 minutes to either one. And we should be, harnessing an awful lot of that development. I put a lot of faith, too, in Great Rivers Landing. You notice I didn't say the H word. And I have an agreement with Hastings Family Service that I said every time somebody uses the H word from now on, I collect $1, and then I donate that to Hastings Family Service. So I hope that we continue to put the H word to sleep in the long run. But a project like Great Rivers Landing could start the whole ball rolling. It's a phenomenal project, and there it is right before you even get to the 4 quadrants that we're talking about. And again, looking at the developer, when I went down to Louisville a couple of years ago, and the Wylands gave me a wonderful tour of their projects, and they seem to be, and I hope they would be here too, the kind of developer that comes in, starts a project, and then says, well, now what else is there? Looking around. And I had, one of the sons was actually, he and I walked up and down Vermilion Street, and he said, well, what else you got? And I said, well, we have Rosewood, and at that time it was the vacant space there where art space is now. But as an example, they Confluence down in Louisville took ownership of the old Elks Club, an 8-story grand dame, and did a marvelous job of renovation. 2 ballrooms. You go up 3 floors, and there's a little Matchbox theater where they were rehearsing Little Shop of Horrors. And behind the Elks Club was a parking ramp that was attached to that, which was then attached to a Hilton hotel. And then they took me across the street and said, well, here's a little commercial area where we took over some old buildings, and we started some businesses, got some business owners in there, an art store, clothing store, and so forth. And it sort of, primes the pump, keeps priming the pump to get things moving. So hopefully they'll be somebody that might be looking up this way too for the first quadrant, second, third, or fourth regarding that. And as I say, it's exciting. It's exciting, but I think we need to say this is what we want to do with maybe a few exceptions on down the line and stick with it this time.
Like you said, development spurs development. And so this plan provides us a really good guide, but also allows for flexibility to work with, the private developers to make this happen. So.
I'll get off my soapbox now. Okay.
So that's all I had. If you guys don't have any other questions, this will be brought forward to the council on Monday, April 16th. So.
Thanks, Maureen.
Am I to be excused?
Yes,
Thank
Martha's
you.
got to sneak away.
Okay. So.
On to reports and information.
Reports and information. Well, I still have an item under there with the H word on it. Great Rivers Landing Development Update, I should change this to. As you all know, we transferred the property just over a month ago. The final plat is in and probably has been recorded by Dakota County since I've written this report, which is great. I did talk to them, and I plan to continue to talk to them frequently to see where they're at progressing on the project itself. As stated, they're making good progress on their engineering design team preparing for those Part 2 historic tax credit submittal, and that they're on track for the August 1st building permit submittal deadline. That within the purchase and development agreement, that's the next big deadline that they have to meet to submit their building plans to us by August 1st, and then within 30 days be in the position to construct. And so that's we're working towards that. We have a decision coming up here in about another week or two on our $250,000 grant from Dakota County CDA. From the conversations that I've had with them, I'm hopeful on that one, more hopeful than I had been when I submitted it. So keep my fingers crossed on that one, and hopefully be able to bring in more funding, and that again would help to offset the remaining cleanup costs that we have at Hudson. So that's what I have for a Great Rivers Landing development update. Yep.
Just cost Joe $2.
I know.
If it's in writing, 3.
If it's in writing, okay, fine, I'll get you. And then I can turn it over to Morgan.
Thank you. I just wanted to provide just a short update on business retention and expansion visits. I know we went through kind of a summary at the end of 2017 about the business retention and expansion program, but I just wanted to point out a common theme through both 2017 and 2018 has been workforce and diversity with the businesses that I've spoken to. Regarding workforce, I've reached out to Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. They have workforce strategy consultants that work directly with cities and directly with businesses to assist them in working towards solutions to their workforce challenges, and to better understand the resources available for us as a city to offer to our businesses. Additionally, I will be attending the Community Conversation on Diversity and Inclusion on April 29th, just to hear what the community's thoughts are on diversity, as diversity directly relates to workforce as well. I think, growing our population will grow our workforce. And more specific, I guess I should have brought this up with Minnesota DEED strategy consultants. I attended a workforce roundtable yesterday, and it was a great program put on by Minnesota DEED, and they went over some programs, the Minnesota Job Skills Partnership Program, which is a great program for our businesses in town, a pipeline program, and Minnesota Apprenticeship Initiative. And so already on one of our visits, I've forwarded this information and contacts to a business that's struggling to find workers. So it's just a quick update, but just to let you guys know that, we're working towards trying to do what we can to help that workforce challenge. Any questions regarding that at all?
Just one question.
Sure.
I noticed on the Vermillion Corridor Plan has lots of housing in it. Was one of the items that these employers have that if they could find the employees, there isn't housing for them here? I mean, which one comes first? The employees need a place to live. And if they have to drive 25 miles, then maybe the wage they're getting doesn't work for them. Is an affordable housing piece part of their solution, or do we know?
And that is a question I ask on all the BRE visits as well, is the housing that we have suitable for your workforce? Some say yes, some say no. But through my experience, if the housing isn't here, the workforce doesn't always follow if there's nowhere for them to live. And if a company is looking to move or expand in our area and there's no housing for their employees, that's part of their decision-making process, is how are you going to show me that you have the workers that I need here? So they come together. If a business were to come here and they have more workforce, they might require more, or they might spur more residential development. But if there's residential development, it might also spur business development. So they kind of come hand in hand.
So that's why we didn't, get Amazon. I take it, yeah, okay.
We checked every box except for that one. So close.
And the next, the City 3, I don't know if you guys have seen, but we have partnered with Hastings Community TV to bring a new series featuring the top news in Hastings. Lee Stoffel does a great job. The series offers updates on city news, events, programming, economic and community development, as well as interesting stories. And the goal of the series, specific to economic development, is to update the community on projects, whether it be new businesses opening, existing businesses expansions, or any redevelopment projects that utilize economic development programs offered by the city. So the featured economic development projects have included the transfer, now I'm gonna owe $1 now, of the Hudson building. And the opening of Beloved Boutique. So Beloved Boutique utilized our Open to Business program and our Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund. And there's a link to the latest video. And I believe they come out twice a month, every 2 weeks. And Lee does a great job, so check it out.
And moving on to the next page, we're losing some of our vacancy, which is a good thing. A couple of activities going on. We have a new floral shop opening up in the old Evanston Art Studio in downtown Hastings. The First National Bank building is no longer advertised for sale. We expect that to be raised soon for the parking ramp for Great River Landing. We did have a ownership change at Westview Mall, which should be a good thing. The new owners of the property seem to be very active in trying to enliven the facility there. We've had the opportunity to meet with them on a couple of different occasions. One of the things that they have done is they're renovating a new existing space within the mall for a new tobacco and vape shop. They have other plans for other items in there as we move forward. And then the thin air site at 3500 Cannon Street has been occupied by Prescription Builders. So we have those activities going on. Yes.
On the vacancies, that, okay, so downtown, Highway 55, so forth. Is the old Rosewood property one of these items?
On that one, it isn't, because it's primarily a residential building in a residential neighborhood, so that wouldn't be on there yet.
Okay. If you're not aware, commissioners who aren't privy to the council agenda and so forth, there is a potential buyer who wants to take over Rosewood and turn it into a, for lack of a better word, rehab center, I guess is, it would be residents there recovering from various types of things. There would be staff in the building, nurse, cook, housekeeping, so forth. We've got 3 of these in Hastings right now, I believe.
Well, actually, on this one, Commissioners, this one's a little bit different. They're terming it an inpatient treatment facility for chemical dependency, and so they would propose that they would have people in there for treatment for a period of 30 days. They would have medical staff there to treat the individuals. And so that differs from what we have as a group residential home, for example, people that had formerly been through treatment but are in a group home situation. And so we've got an issue before us on council on Monday. When we took a look at how their facility would fit into our zoning code, we made the determination that it would not fit within the R2 residential district, that it was too intensive, that the definition of the facility, according to state statute, did not fit. And so there is an opportunity for an individual that disagrees with our interpretation of the code as a staff member to challenge that to the city council. And so there's an action on that coming up on Monday night. And the council will need to make a determination as to whether they believe that staff is correct in their interpretation of the zoning code, that this would not be allowed within the zoning district, or they may have the opportunity to override staff's decision, which could set up the opportunity for them to apply. If the council was to say yes and override staff's decision on Monday night, it doesn't mean that the permit would be issued. It would just mean that the application could move forward, and that it would presumably go to Planning Commission and Council if that decision was made.
Now, it's my understanding that if the council were to vote against, the purchaser has the right to take their grievance then to court, to district court, to see if they can get a legal interpretation that favors their interpretation of what R2 is versus what our interpretation of R2 is?
I believe that would be an opportunity for them if they chose to do so. At that point, they would have exhausted any any measures that the city could consider at that time. So I would assume that if they wanted to contest that further, it would need to be in court.
I'm asking these questions because, you know, we're all, and I think the whole community is pretty aware of what the historical nature of Rosewood is. Ironically, it was a hospital originally, and now they want to do some medical service again. Not sure what the zoning was, you know, way back then. And here we sit as HEDRA. Would there be an opportunity, and I'm not asking for any kind of a vote here or anything, but what I'd like, if we have the opportunity, is to have staff investigate HEDRA purchasing Rosewood. And then marketing it, or keeping it as a city, building. Perhaps the Pioneer Room could move out of their cramped space and take this over. We could have a museum, you know, something along that line, or it could be sold as another bed and breakfast. I'm not sure if office space would be appropriate in that zoning area, but just wondering how other commissioners might feel about that. And again, just asking you as staff, is this something that we could do as HEDRA?
Well, Commissioner, as far as the question of could we do it, I suppose we could. I guess the question would come up as to how it would fit within other priorities that we may establish. And maybe the discussion may be best when we have our workshop here shortly to discuss that more in detail, potential parameters that and how that may line up with the priorities that we have.
I'm an on the record preemptive nay. Just get that out there.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we're not taking a straw vote.
Unofficially.
Yeah, we're not taking a straw
Unofficially,
vote or
straw
anything. It just, you know, I'm always looking for a creative way. You know, downtown Minneapolis, they picked up a movie theater and rolled it 4 blocks over, set it back up again. You know, could this be picked up and moved? Maybe a developer. I'm not saying us, but you know, there it is, and I just see it as being kind of vulnerable right now in terms of what is out there that it could attract. So maybe we could put it on the workshop just to have a short discussion without a vote. and just see what our options might be. If not HEDRA, maybe the city itself. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Just to kind of follow up on updates here, we have the Kateria Funeral Home under construction on Vermillion Street, and we have plans for Wise Funeral Home expansion on Spring Street. So a bounty of funeral home expansions within the city. I don't know how to react to that one, but that's what we have at the moment. Exactly.
Supply and demand, John.
Supply and demand. So
People are just dying to get into it.
Oh, people are just dying to get into Hastings, exactly. So, and Chair, I think at this time, we would leave the meeting open, but we would retire to the volunteer room for discussion of our HEDRA work plan. So I think this would conclude the video portion of the meeting, and then we can have our workshop portion. But the meeting itself would be in a short recess until we moved over, and then continue under the same meeting.
Ron?
Mr. Chair, I was thinking with 3 of our members not here tonight, I'm not sure having the workshop tonight, I was wondering if we should maybe make emphasis that it's on our May agenda to have the workshop at that time, because to have a good workshop, you need to have all the input. And I'm questioning with, 3 of the 4 members not here tonight,
timely recommendation, because I have a 10 and a 6-year-old that just got home to an empty house. So I would have to duck out pretty quickly tonight as well. Mark?
And I agree. I still think that's the right thing, because, and even if it's not our May date, we set the date and make the emphasis that we need all the members here, because if we're gonna really brainstorm about I think it's a pivotal point. We gotta figure out the next step. And I got a few bullet points here that I was gonna bring up, but I recommend that if you have these, I'm gonna be sending it to staff, so it gives you a chance to do a little research and figure out yay, nay, I wouldn't do that, or at least it kind of sets the agenda of when we get in there, so it's not yeah.
Maybe I'll make this suggestion too. Like what Commissioner Vaughn was saying, if anyone has any bullet point suggestions, I'll gather those together and we can send those out. Or if you want to send them out individual, that you can certainly do that. When we look at the scheduled meeting for May, whenever that is, here's my suggestion. We will devote that to the workshop. If we have action that needs taken, let's hold another meeting that month so we can really put the emphasis on there. And I just want to put that out for discussion in knowledge that you all have busy schedules, and another meeting night is another meeting night.
What night are we looking, what's
Well,
the date?
I think we would keep the workshop as scheduled on the next scheduled meeting on the 10th. But what I'm saying is we would just have the workshop that night. Any action that may come up for HEDRA, we would schedule another meeting for that. Okay.
Okay, just, we are,
So the meeting, the meeting schedule would go forward as planned on the May 10th meeting. May 10th would be workshop only. And then we would reserve the possibility of holding a special meeting if business necessitates it, to take care of our business items.
okay, I am going to be out of town.
On the 10th? Okay.
Yeah. So all the more.
Yeah, and I
importance
think
for the rest
Martha
of the
said
commission.
earlier to me, now that I remember it, that she might be out too. So let me put some dates out there at this point. I think what I've heard tonight is a very good point. It's imperative that we have a strong presence for these meetings. So I will follow up on dates. Okay, thank you.
So, on that note, motion to adjourn, and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Okay.